My own mother called me a disgrace just because I took an honest, blue-collar job to keep a roof over my head. If you've ever been discarded by the very people who share your blood, then pull up a chair. You're watching Revenge Stories 101. My mother cut me out of a Mother's Day dinner via a group text, and my siblings, they chimed in with champagne emojis like my absence was some glorious victory. My name is Chloe. I'm 28 years old, and I need to rip this story out of my chest because it's been rotting inside me for way too long. The text dropped like a bomb on May 8th. I was sitting in my beat-up Subaru in the parking lot of Apex Manufacturing in Seattle under the endless, soul-crushing gray drizzle. I was chewing on a stale granola bar that tasted like damp cardboard, watching the clock tick down the 14 minutes until my shift started. Suddenly, the family group chat lit up. It's a chat my mother, Margaret, rules like a dictator issuing royal decrees. She typed, "Mother's Day dinner this Sunday for the successful children only. Reservations at Laura in Bellevue, 6 p.m. sharp." Then came the guest list. Jackson, Emily, Marcus. Marcus is Emily's husband. That snob of a brother-in-law got an invite before I did, and this is a grown man who once asked me if Washington, D.C. was in Washington State. But sure, he's a contractor. He's got money. He's successful. My name was nowhere to be found. Jackson, my 32-year-old brother, a self-proclaimed stockbroker who hasn't closed a single legitimate deal since last summer, immediately fired off 3 clinking champagne emojis. Emily sent an animated sticker of someone waving goodbye, a mocking, cartoonish wave, as if my entire existence was the punchline to their inside joke. Sitting alone in my car, I curled in on myself. The cold didn't come from the Seattle rain outside the glass. It started in the center of my chest and radiated outward, violently stripping away every ounce of body heat I had left. Scrolling up, the reality of the cruelty hit me. Margaret had been texting the group for 3 solid days, planning the restaurant, coordinating the time, asking about dietary restrictions. 3 agonizing days of planning, knowing damn well I was banned, and not a single one of them said a word to me. Not Jackson, the guy I used to slip rent money to when his accounts were overdrawn. Not Emily, who came crying to borrow my most expensive silk dress after spilling red wine all over hers hours before a gala. Not a single word. They were all complicit in the silence. By the way, I'm using their real names because honestly, at this point, I don't care who reads this or whose fragile ego gets bruised. But that dinner wasn't the beginning. The rot actually started 2 years earlier. 2 years ago, I had to drop out of the University of Washington halfway through my sophomore year. I simply ran out of money. My mother, who had co-signed a modest student loan my freshman year, weaponized it against me every single Thanksgiving. She treated my sociology major like dog dirt she just scraped off the bottom of her designer heels. Finally, she flat out refused to co-sign for the next year. With zero safety net, I hustled. I applied everywhere and eventually landed a night shift quality control gig at Apex Manufacturing, making $19.40 an hour. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't the kind of job you brag about on LinkedIn with a 3-paragraph essay about exciting new chapters. But it was honest, grueling work. It paid the rent, the car insurance, and the cheap pasta that kept me alive. When I called Margaret to tell her the news, the line went so dead I thought the call had dropped. Then her voice sliced through the speaker. "You are the stain of this family." Not, "I'm disappointed," not, "I wish you'd aim higher." A stain, like I was a filthy, embarrassing spill on the pristine velvet rug she was trying to show off to her country club friends. What did I say back? Something pathetic. I mumbled an apology. That's what I did back then. I apologized for the sheer inconvenience of my existence. After that, the family caste system was carved in stone. Jackson was the golden boy. He wore tailored suits to casual backyard barbecues and bragged about phantom million-dollar portfolios. The fact that he owed Margaret $23,000 in cash and hadn't paid back a dime? Irrelevant. He had a title. Emily was the shining star, living in a Bellevue mansion with a 3-car garage. The fact that Marcus micromanaged every penny to the point that Emily couldn't buy a $5 Starbucks without her verbal permission, also ignored. She provided the perfect aesthetic. And me? I had a factory-issued fleece jacket and dark circles under my eyes. Then came the August family barbecue. My cousin Sarah cornered me, wrapping me in a tight hug. "Oh my God, Chloe, I heard you're a project manager for a massive tech firm down in Silicon Valley. California must be amazing." I stood there paralyzed, holding a paper plate of lukewarm potato salad, trying to figure out what alternate universe I had just crashed into. Margaret had completely erased my reality. She had fabricated a phantom daughter, slapped a Silicon Valley tech executive label on her, and fed the lie to our entire extended family. In her twisted fantasy, I was living the high life in California, everything was flawless, and she was the triumphant mother of 3 spectacular successes. That night, I sat in the Apex parking lot until the windshield completely fogged over, and the harsh amber security lights blurred into nothing. I didn't cry. I just retreated into a place deep inside myself, a place that was utterly silent, freezing, and infinitely far away. Hold on a second. If you're listening to this right now and you can feel a piece of your own hidden pain in these words, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments what city you're tuning in from and what time it is. I read every single comment. Your presence here means more to me than you know. Emily's birthday rolled around in September. I went. I know, some of you are screaming at the screen right now, asking why I would subject myself to that. But she was still my sister. There was this stubborn, pathetic, bruised part of my brain that believed if I just showed up enough, if I was just present, the ice would eventually thaw. I bought her a cashmere scarf. It cost me $94. On my budget, $94 wasn't just money. It was electricity, it was gas, it was a week's worth of groceries. I wrapped it in real tissue paper and drove the 45 minutes out to their pristine, soulless mansion in Bellevue. The house had blinding white walls, shrubs manicured to within an inch of their lives, and a backyard patio packed with 20 people holding overpriced cocktails. I navigated the crowd, dodging cousins who squinted at me and asked how Silicon Valley was treating me. I just forced a dead smile and said I was doing fine. After dinner, it was time for gifts. When Emily got to my box, she pulled out the scarf. She held it up by the corners, looked around the patio to make sure she had an audience, and with this sickeningly sweet, theatrical voice, she announced, "Oh wow, look everyone, factory overtime money." Marcus, her husband, actually snorted, a loud, condescending scoff like his job exploiting subcontractors was somehow nobility compared to my factory line. I looked at my mother. Margaret was standing barely 6 feet away, holding a glass of chilled Pinot Grigio. She didn't say a word. She didn't correct them. She didn't even blink. She just took a slow, calculated sip of her wine. I set my paper plate down on Marcus's brand new teakwood patio table, the one he'd spent 20 minutes bragging about, and I walked away. I walked straight through that echoing house, out the front door, and into the damp Seattle night. Nobody followed me. I sat in my Subaru for a long time, staring at their glowing porch lights through my rain-streaked windshield. Then I put the car in drive. The following Tuesday, I changed my phone number. No dramatic exit texts, no furious emails. I just walked into a Verizon store in downtown Seattle and bought a new SIM card for $35. I permanently deleted my Facebook. Not deactivated, deleted. When my lease was up the next month, I packed my boxes and moved to a cramped apartment in Everett, miles away from my old zip code. No forwarding address. I didn't dramatically disappear. I simply stopped reaching out to people who had never noticed I was there in the first place. I need to be brutally honest about this next part, because people always skip the ugly phase of walking away. They jump straight from the trauma to the triumphant healing, like there's a magical bridge connecting the two. There isn't. There's just a void. 3 weeks into the total silence, I completely shattered. I called out sick on a Thursday, lying to my manager that I had food poisoning. In reality, I felt like someone had cored me out with a melon baller. The emptiness inside my chest was so vast that if you dropped a coin down my throat, you'd hear it echo. I didn't shower. I lay on my cheap thrift store sofa in the same sweatpants for 2 days, eating dry, generic cereals straight out of the cardboard box. I watched 9 straight hours of a British baking show and couldn't tell you a single thing anyone baked. At one point, at 2 a.m., I picked up my phone and dialed Margaret's number from memory. It rang twice, then I hung up. I don't know what I would have said. Probably something pathetic. Probably another apology for existing. Luckily, I'll never know. That same week, a woman named Brenda saved my life without even trying. Brenda was a senior line operator at Apex. She was 55, divorced, with 2 grown sons, and a voice that sounded like she gargled gravel and black coffee, though she rarely drank anything but water. She had worked at the factory for 19 years and took zero disrespect from anyone. She noticed I looked like a walking corpse. She didn't ask probing questions, she didn't offer unsolicited therapy. She just left a heavy plastic Tupperware bowl on my locker shelf with a neon post-it note that read, "Microwave for 2 minutes. Don't overcook it. I'm not making more." It was homemade chicken and dumpling soup. I sat in the fluorescent-lit break room at 10:30 at night, eating that soup, and I cried so hard I couldn't breathe. It tasted like salt, heartbreak, and actual care. Brenda walked past, saw me sobbing into the bowl, patted my shoulder exactly once, and kept walking. That was it. That was what a mother was supposed to feel like, not a performance review, just presence. 18 months passed. It wasn't a movie montage. It was grueling, repetitive survival. But the fog slowly lifted. I got promoted to shift supervisor, bumping my pay to $24.75 an hour. I started going to a local boxing gym on Tuesdays and Thursdays just to burn off the toxic energy I used to spend waiting for text messages from people who hated me. And on Sundays, I drove to Brenda's house. She made pot roast. Her massive, loud sons would argue over football and drag me into their debates like I'd been sitting at that table my whole life. Nobody asked about my mother. Nobody asked why a 29-year-old woman was spending her weekends with her factory coworker instead of her blood relatives. They just passed me the mashed potatoes. For the first time in my life, I wasn't a stain. I was just Chloe. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon in March when my new secret phone number rang. The screen flashed an unknown 509 area code. I almost didn't answer. When you've gone no contact, every unknown number feels like a trap. I thought it might be Margaret calling from a burner phone, but for some inexplicable reason, my thumb swiped accept. "Chloe, sweetheart, is that you?" It was my grandmother, Beatrice, my late father's mother. She was 82 years old, living entirely alone in a small, wood-paneled cabin in Winthrop, Washington, a rustic town tucked deep in the Cascade Mountains. I hadn't spoken to her in over a year, not because I didn't love her, but because when you vanish to save your own life, there's always collateral damage. You don't just lose your abusers, you lose the innocent bystanders too. Beatrice had tracked me down through a tiny local credit union. I was still listed as the beneficiary on an ancient savings account my dad had set up for me before he died when I was 9. I had recently called them about a mailed statement, so they had my updated number. Beatrice had literally marched into the branch, explained she was looking for her estranged granddaughter, and some sympathetic teller bent the corporate rules and gave it to her. Sometimes small-town banking is a godsend. The first thing she said, her voice sharp and steady despite her age, was that she had been looking for me for 6 months. Margaret had told the entire extended family that I had permanently relocated to Silicon Valley. I sat on the edge of my thrift store bed and told her the truth. I told her I was in Everett, working at a manufacturing plant. I told her I never left the state. Beatrice was dead silent for a long moment. Then she let out a dry, humorless scoff, a sound from a woman who had known exactly who Margaret was for 40 years. Your mother grades human beings the same way she grades supermarket produce. If the skin looks even a little bruised, she throws it back. She only wants what looks perfect in the bowl. She took a breath and said the words that finally broke the dam inside me. Your father would be utterly ashamed of how Margaret treats you. She said it so casually, as if she were stating that the sky was blue. I didn't say anything back. I just sat there in the quiet of my apartment, letting myself feel something I hadn't felt in my entire adult life. I had someone on my side, not because I had a fancy title, just because I existed. Then Beatrice casually dropped another bomb. Jackson had called her the previous month, begging for a loan. She had flat out denied him. She knew he was bleeding Margaret dry, to the tune of exactly $23,000. Jackson had tried to fast-talk her, but Beatrice wasn't buying it. Men like your brother think if they speak fast enough, the math stops applying, she muttered. Part 6. Midnight Drives to Winthrop. For the next 8 months, I drove out to Winthrop every other weekend, 4 hours each way, winding through the treacherous mountain passes of the Cascades. The odometer on my beat-up Subaru clicked past 140,000 miles, making a rattling sound that I chose to interpret as sheer enthusiasm rather than a cry for a mechanic. Beatrice's cabin smelled like black tea, aged cedar, and something else I couldn't place at first until I realized it smelled like my dad. We would sit on her back porch as the mountain peaks turned that bruised purple color of dusk. Sitting between us was her cat, Winston, a massive 15-pound orange Maine Coon who purred like a malfunctioning diesel engine and shed so much hair on my black work pants I looked like I was wearing Angora. Beatrice was dying of congestive heart failure. We didn't talk about it like a tragedy. She mentioned her doctor's appointments the same way one mentions a trip to the post office. I'd drive her down the mountain to the clinic, and we'd sit in the waiting room flipping through magazines from 2019 like time travelers, critiquing recipes for using too much butter. But mostly, we talked about real life. She told me stories about my father, Arthur, stories about how he once drove 10 hours straight just to surprise Margaret with grocery store roses, only for Margaret to complain that they weren't professionally arranged. Beatrice laughed when she told it, but her eyes were cold. We talked about the Apex factory, too. She wanted to know everything, how the machinery sounded, what the floor supervisors were like, who my favorite coworkers were. While peeling potatoes with a paring knife that was older than I was, she looked right at me and said, "Working with your hands is the only honest living left in this world, Chloe. Anyone who looks down on factory work has never gone a single day without taking the roof over their head for granted." Winston the cat watched her from the counter like a quality control inspector. I guess Winston and I had that in common. Those 8 months were the greatest, most profoundly peaceful weekends of my entire life. I was finally a daughter. I was finally a granddaughter. I was finally seen. And then it ended. Beatrice passed away on a rainy Tuesday in October. The credit union manager was the one who actually called me because I was still listed as her sole emergency contact. I drove the 4 hours to Winthrop in a blinding downpour. When I finally pulled into her gravel driveway, I just sat in my running car for 20 minutes. The cabin looked exactly the same. The porch light was still on, which meant it had been burning since the last time she went to sleep and had simply never been turned off. That tiny, insignificant detail almost broke me in half. When I unlocked the door, Winston the cat was sitting on the kitchen table next to an empty teacup. He let out a low, mournful meow. I fed him, cleaned his litter box, and then sat on Beatrice's faded floral sofa, staring at the wood-paneled wall for a very, very long time. A week later, my phone rang. Richard Sterling, estate attorney out of Spokane. His voice was polite, measured, and sounded like it wore a necktie. He told me that Beatrice had updated her will exactly 11 months before she died. She left everything to me. Everything. The mountain cabin, valued at around $142,000, her life savings in the credit union, totaling $87,400, a sealed, handwritten letter, and Winston, who was technically written into the legal document because Beatrice was just that meticulous. I didn't tell Margaret, I didn't tell Jackson, I didn't tell Emily. I sat on the cheap linoleum floor of my Everett apartment, the phone pressed hard against my ear, and I couldn't speak for so long that Mr. Sterling actually had to ask if I was still on the line. I whispered, yes. That was the only word I could manage. But in my family, nothing is ever allowed to be peaceful, because less than a week later, the vultures caught the scent. Jackson, and this is peak Jackson behavior, was randomly searching county real estate records online, probably hoping to find some phantom property he could brag about. When he saw the Winthrop cabin's deed transfer pending in my name, he called Margaret so fast his phone probably caught fire. And Margaret went absolutely nuclear. Margaret tried calling my old number, but it was dead. So what did she do? She Googled Apex Manufacturing and called the main factory line. She demanded my name. The receptionist, not knowing any better, patched her through to the supervisor's desk on the factory floor. I saw the Seattle area code flash on the caller ID and just let it ring. She called back 4 times in a row. By the 5th ring, the plant manager shot me a look that clearly said, handle this or shut it off. I unplugged the phone from the wall. 2 weeks later, the certified mail arrived. Margaret had hired a bulldog lawyer. She was officially contesting the will. Her grounds? She claimed Beatrice was not of sound mind when she signed it. Not of sound mind? This was a woman who 6 months before her death had alphabetized her entire spice rack, translated a dense Russian novel for fun, and absolutely destroyed me in a game of Scrabble using the word quixotic. But sure, Margaret, she was losing her grip. The legal filing included a sworn statement from Jackson. He claimed he frequently visited Beatrice and noticed severe signs of dementia. I read that sentence 3 times until my vision blurred. Jackson had not visited Beatrice in 4 years. The last time he drove up to Winthrop, he stayed for exactly 40 minutes, demanded a $2,000 handout, and stormed out when she laughed in his face. Beatrice had told me the exact dollar amount and the exact timestamp of that visit, because again, her mind was a steel trap. I needed a lawyer. I frantically called 3 law firms in the Seattle area. The minimum retainers started at $4,000. I had $2,100 in my checking account and a $740 emergency fund meant for the day my Subaru finally died. I couldn't afford to defend the inheritance of a dead woman against a living woman who had a platinum credit card limit. I sat in my car in a Walmart parking lot and sobbed until my ribs ached. I went inside and bought generic ibuprofen and a frozen pizza, because that is what grief and financial panic look like at 29. It's not cinematic, it's just hungry, exhausted, and terrifying. I almost gave up. I want to be brutally honest about that. People gloss over the moment you stand at the edge of the cliff and seriously consider just walking away from the fight. I called my coworker Brenda at 11 p.m. I told her I was going to sign it all over, the cabin, the money, everything. Let Margaret have her blood money. I told her I didn't have the fight left in me, and that maybe Beatrice would understand. But Brenda didn't give me a motivational speech. She didn't tell me to be a warrior. She just said in her gravelly voice, "Don't you dare sign a damn thing tonight. Go to sleep. Call me tomorrow." But 2 days later, Margaret made the biggest mistake of her life. She found out Brenda's name. Can you believe the sheer audacity? A mother and brother who ignored a dying woman for years suddenly swooping in to steal what she left behind? It makes your blood boil, doesn't it? If you've ever dealt with greedy relatives circling like vultures after a tragedy, vent about it in the comments. We are reading them all. But don't worry, Margaret just poked the wrong bear. Part 9 is coming up, and the counterattack is going to be legendary. Margaret's fatal mistake wasn't just contesting the will. Her fatal mistake was dragging my coworker, Brenda, into the crossfire. Somehow, Margaret had figured out Brenda's full name from the factory receptionist. She actually called Brenda at her home, putting on her best, concerned, wealthy suburban mother voice. Margaret spun a wild tale, claiming I was mentally unstable, that I had a history of erratic behavior, and that I had manipulated a dying old woman into changing her will. Brenda listened to the entire monologue in dead silence. Then she simply said, "I've heard enough," and hung up. When Brenda told me about the call the next day in the break room, I felt the familiar panic rising in my throat. I started to furiously apologize, terrified that Brenda would pull away from the mess of my toxic family. Brenda just held up a hand and cut me off. "Listen to me," she rasped. "During my divorce, my ex-husband tried to call my boss to claim I was hiding offshore assets. Your mother is an amateur. Now sit down and eat your sandwich." The next day, Brenda walked into the factory with a manila folder. It turned out her ex-husband's brother, a guy named Cliff, was a senior paralegal at a ruthless law firm in Seattle. He owed Brenda a massive favor regarding a boat incident on a very bad Thanksgiving. She didn't elaborate, and I didn't ask. Under the supervision of an attorney, Cliff prepared my entire legal response. Instead of a $4,000 retainer, it cost me exactly $600 in filing fees. I could afford $600. That weekend, I drove back up to the Winthrop cabin to start cleaning out Beatrice's things. Winston, the cat, greeted me at the door like I was 20 minutes late for an appointment. While clearing out the hallway closet, behind a stack of mothball-scented wool blankets, I found an old brown cardboard Buster Brown shoebox. Inside were 14 handwritten letters. They were all addressed to me. Some had been mailed to Margaret's house years ago and were stamped "Return to Sender." Some had never been mailed at all, spanning over 3 years. And sitting right at the bottom, beneath the letters, was a single crisp sheet of paper addressed to her estate attorney, Richard Sterling, dated exactly 6 months before she died. I stood in the hallway, reading it with shaking hands. "To whom concerns, I, Beatrice Volkoff, write this of my own free will and with absolute clarity of mind. My daughter-in-law Margaret has not visited me in 9 years. My grandson Jackson has not visited in 4 years, and his last visit was solely to extort money. My granddaughter Emily has not called me in 6 years. My granddaughter Chloe is the only member of this family who has cared for me, visited me, and treated me with respect. My estate will reflect this." Every single letter was dated, signed, and, I swear on my life, she noted the exact weather in the margins. October 4th, clear skies, 58 degrees. January 12th, freezing rain. Winston refuses to go out. She had obsessively documented her own lucidity because she knew that one day Margaret would try to question it. I sank to the floor of the hallway, clutching that cardboard box to my chest, and sobbed. It wasn't the terrified crying from the Walmart parking lot. It was the overwhelming relief of being violently protected by someone who wasn't even there anymore. Beatrice had fought for me from beyond the grave. The legal dispute technically lasted 3 months, but it felt like 3 lifetimes. Cliff, the paralegal, God bless whatever happened on that Thanksgiving boat, submitted everything to Margaret's lawyer. The handwritten letter to Mr. Sterling, the 14 dated letters with weather logs, Beatrice's medical records from the Spokane hospital showing perfect cognitive evaluations right up until her final weeks, and the credit union logs proving I was the only family member who had physically brought her into the bank for years. Margaret's lawyer, a guy working out of a flashy but small office, reviewed the mountain of undeniable evidence and immediately called Margaret. He strongly advised her to drop the case. Margaret, blinded by her own ego, refused. She actually spent another $4,200 trying to push a legal argument that my frequent visits constituted undue influence. Let me repeat that. Her legal argument was that I loved my grandmother too much and that showing up consistently was suspicious.
The judge didn't even entertain it. Margaret's lawyer withdrew from the case a week before the hearing, which in the legal world is the equivalent of your Uber driver pulling over on the highway and telling you to walk. The case was dismissed with prejudice. The cabin and the money were legally mine. Margaret's total cost, $11,500 down the drain for absolutely nothing. And then her house of cards collapsed. Jackson's credit card debt finally caught up with him. 3 maxed-out cards and a high-interest payday loan. He came crawling to Margaret for a $2,000 bailout in December, but Margaret had just burned $11,500 on a failed lawsuit. She told him she didn't have it. That was the first time she ever said no to her golden boy. And just like that, Jackson ghosted her. He didn't check on her, didn't text her on Christmas. He vanished the second the ATM stopped dispensing cash. Emily's situation imploded right on schedule. Her husband, Marcus, flat out refused to help Margaret pay her remaining legal fees. His refusal sparked a massive fight, cracking their already fragile, image-obsessed marriage wide open. Emily stopped visiting Margaret because every visit turned into a guilt trip about money. Within 4 months of the lawsuit failing, both of Margaret's successful children had completely cut her off. The woman who used to orchestrate Mother's Day dinners to exclude me was now spending her Sunday nights entirely alone in her quiet, empty house. Then Mr. Sterling, the estate attorney, called me. His voice was shaky. He said Margaret had shown up at his office, unannounced, and sat in his waiting room for an hour. When he finally came out, she begged him to call me. She told him, "I don't know how to reach her. She changed everything. I don't know her number. I don't know where she lives. I don't even know what she looks like anymore." Mr. Sterling told me it was the saddest thing he'd seen in 22 years of estate law. He asked if I wanted to relay a message. I looked out the window of my Everett apartment. I watched a kid ride a bike over a speed bump. I took a deep breath and said, "I appreciate the call, Mr. Sterling, but I'm not coming back." I didn't yell. I didn't deliver a villainous monologue. I just stated a fact, like talking about the weather. I chose myself, and it didn't feel like a victorious cinematic revenge. It just felt incredibly light, like I had finally put down a boulder I forgot I was carrying. Today is Sunday. I'm at Brenda's house. The pot roast is in the oven, and the carrots fall apart when you touch them with a fork. Her sons are screaming at the TV over a football game, and someone just handed me a basket of warm bread without me having to ask. Margaret recently mailed a 30th birthday card to my post office box, no return address. I looked at it for a second or two, set it on the kitchen counter, and went back to folding my laundry. Some things just don't need a response anymore. And that, everyone, is the ultimate form of revenge. Complete, unbothered peace. Chloe's story proves that toxic people will eventually consume themselves. They will burn down their own lives just to stay warm, and the best thing you can do is be far, far away when the fire starts. You do not owe your sanity to your bloodline. If you are sitting at a table where you have to shrink yourself to fit in, it is time to get up and build your own table. Thank you for tuning in to Revenge Stories 101. If this story resonated with you, hit that like button, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear it today. Click the video on the screen for another crazy story. I'll see you in the next one.